Hey, my friends, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I want you to picture a great big brick wall. It's all pristine and everything's right. And now I want you to picture a Kool-Aid man with a face that looks like mine exploding through it, because that's how we're going to come at this passage today. We're in Matthew chapter 19. We're dealing with stuff that sounds like it's super controversial, hot button issue material. And maybe it is for the audience today as we read it, but it was not for the original audience. The crises and the points of tension that we might feel with this, people who Jesus was talking to, people who Matthew was writing to, they did not feel those tensions that we feel here. So we're going to go right at it and just speak to the thing. Here's what we're getting. Throughout the last 8 chapters or so of Matthew, there is this consistent narrative pattern where Jesus does something transcendent and beautiful, and people are like, whoa, God is real. I want to sign up. This is amazing. I like this kingdom. We should do this. And then the Pharisees and Sadducees come along, or one or the other that teaches the law, and they get mad about things, usually the Pharisees. And they're mad about not that important things. And they're like, you shouldn't eat food like that on the Sabbath. Don't break the laws of time and space on certain days of the week. Heal him the next day. That's offensive. Or how come your disciples don't wash their hands well enough? They should go up further than the wrist, and they should get under the fingernails more. And like right before that and right after that, Jesus is like feeding 5,000 people with one lunchbox, or causing matter to appear out of non-matter, breaking the laws of physics or fluid dynamics. It's such a gross, weird contrast between these two things, but this is the narrative pattern that is established. And in this narrative pattern, nobody is banging down the doors of the Pharisees and Sadducees to convert to Pharisaism. Nobody's lining up for this. It's not booming. What's booming is the kingdom values stuff. And people hear this rigorous teaching at the end of chapter 18, beginning of chapter 19. You expect to wake up and have like, everybody left. That was just too much. Nope. Instead, they follow Jesus across state lines into Judea, and they're like, just keep doing it. We want to hear more about this stuff. And so he's healing people, and incredible things are happening. And then the Pharisees come along, and they are like, okay, well, the healings, that's super, and that's very interesting and all, but let's talk about what really matters, divorce and remarriage. And they ask the following question: is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? It's like, how socially not aware are you people? Do you not see the beauty of what is going on right here? And that is what stands out to you? That is what you think we need to be discussing right now? Like, that guy was dead a second ago, and now he's not. That lady was bleeding for a decade, and now she isn't. That guy's arm was missing, and now it just grew back. Like, come on, get your priorities straight. But still, this is what they come with. And then Jesus gives an answer. Now, here's why I set all of that up the way I did. Because Jesus' answer is reflective of his assumptions, of Matthew's assumptions, of everybody in the original audience's assumptions. No one is imagining any controversy with the statement Jesus is about to make. This is the first half of 2 parts of a dialogue. Jesus is using this rabbinical technique he often used, where he says the obvious thing first, and then we get into the twist that illustrates the more pronounced theological truth about the kingdom, which we springboard to off of the set of standard assumptions that everybody holds. So as I read this next passage, there are probably going to be 2 parts of your brains here, depending on how you're wired and how you look at the world right now. Some of you are going to hear me read this next passage, and you're going to be like, all right, thank goodness. There it is. We're finally getting to the part in the podcast. Matt can't avoid it anymore. We have to talk about some of these hot button gender issues and cultural issues that are going on in the world today. Others of you are going to be like, this passage kills me because it makes Jesus look backwards for what I'm pretty sure the values of the world ought to be. He sounds narrow and bigoted, and this is the part of the Bible I feel like I have to apologize for. And maybe others of you are like, I don't know, I'm in a unitard. I'm really sweaty in my lower back right now, and I'm just hoping people at this 24-hour gym don't notice. That's why I took the treadmill in the corner, but now there's a lady walking over here. I feel weird. I'm going to go get a towel. And here we all are just trying to figure this thing out. The reality is the pressures you feel, whatever they are not the pressures the original audience felt. And so we want to try to understand this passage based on the original audience and what was actually being said here in context. So the Pharisees asked the question, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? In verse 4, Jesus replied, "Haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, 'For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate.'" Here is what Jesus meant by that, I think. He meant that God made people male and female, and that because of that, there's some sort of implicit assumption here of attraction between the two that prompts marriage as a phenomenon that happens in society. And Jesus, at least, is here only describing marriage as existing between a man and a woman. And I guess monogamy in the larger context here is intoned. Now, look, if this passage were written, if Jesus were here right now, and he were sorting these things through in a large city in the United States of America, maybe he would have been asked a different setup question to get him in trouble as a trap. Maybe he would have gone harder to the hole. I have no idea. What I know is that in the cultural expectations that were present here, there was no balking whatsoever. He's referencing assumptions from the Old Testament about gender and marriage. Maybe if he's having this conversation in Greece or in Rome, where we know very well that sexual mores were very different in terms of particularly homosexuality, most expressly between older men and younger men. And I mean, we can be offended by that. We can celebrate that. I don't know. You can respond, I guess, however you want to. It's a podcast. But those things are historical realities that we can point to documentation and say, this seems to have been present in this part of the ancient Mediterranean world. We don't have much in the way of evidence that suggests that such cultural practices were present with this audience in the Jewish part of the ancient Mediterranean world. So, wherever you're coming from, we're all in the same boat here. We're at a crossroads. We can do one of two things. We can try to figure out either how to get around what this passage says with some sophisticated interpretations so that we can win an argument with someone online, or we can forget about the argument online and we can continue with what I hope we get to do together here, even when we come to passages that haven't been hard for most of Christian history, but right now are tricky. We can think about it honestly, because I think figuring out what this document is the far more compelling enterprise, especially just in order of operations. You know, like in math, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, you got to do all the things in the right order. The math equation doesn't work. Likewise, when you're trying to understand an ancient religious document that you think there might be a God behind, the first step is understand the raw materials of the document and all of them as best as you can. And then and only then are you going to be really well situated to try to figure out what does it mean? How do we apply that? How do we plug it in with whatever the pressures are that we're feeling today? So in light of that, I want to say something that I know might cause any number of emotional reactions, but I think this is an accurate, factual statement based on the words we are both looking at and thinking about right now. For the Old Testament authors, the Old Testament audience, the New Testament authors, the New Testament audience, Matthew, the people who were in the room as Jesus was talking, and Jesus of Nazareth himself, that the expectation at the time, and this is a theological expectation the way it's presented, is that there are two genders, male and female, and that something about the nature of those two genders prompts this union that is called marriage, and that there's something very special about it, and that it's something that God takes very seriously and that people aren't supposed to mess with. This is not me making the ultimate and final pronouncement on everything concerning gender issues and marriages and marriage contracts and the role of the state in marriage. I'm just not doing any of that. What we're looking at here would seem to be Jesus' baseline expectations, and it looks like everybody was on board with that. We've got some more context coming up to unpack that might reflect back on this to give us more clarity. And then ultimately, here's the deal, because it's a podcast and it's the internet, you can do with this whatever you need to do with it. Some of this stuff is super easy for me to handle. Some of this stuff is a little bit more challenging. Thank you for letting me just go right through the front door with what I see here in terms of Jesus' baseline expectations. Thanks for your grace with me and with each other. I appreciate you, and I appreciate that we have the trust to talk about difficult things directly. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.